Welcome to our town, our times, and our fellow citizens here in Concord, Massachusetts. In many people's eyes, the heart and soul of our nation. Our guest this afternoon is John Muresianu, a fellow citizen here in Concord. Welcome, John.
Welcome. Thank you.
Let me begin, John, with a question that politicians are talking about all the issues. My sense is this campaign of yours for the U.S. Senate, and I believe you've given or will be giving Elizabeth Warren a warning, Americans love underdogs, is not about the issues, but about the issue. If that's correct, can you elaborate?
For me, the number one issue is education. It's the civil rights issue of our time. It's the key to our economy, our democracy, and our identity, but neither major party is giving it the priority it deserves. Politicians of the right and the left give it a lot of lip service. Barack Obama said education is the civil rights issue of our time. So did Michelle Obama. So did John McCain. So did George Bush. So did Donald Trump. Everyone says it, but they don't act on it. I launched the Education First Party because I believe education is the most important issue, and that is my focus.
Thank you. Why do they just pay lip service to it, John?
Because their attention is elsewhere.
And why are you trying to direct their attention to this issue?
Because, just to reiterate, education is the civil rights issue of our time. And it is the key to our economy, our democracy, and our identity.
Thank you for that reiteration. Can you play it out a bit? You've spoken in prior conversations very movingly about what it would provide our children with if they don't have safe schools, safe homes.
Yeah. Well, the focus of our attention should be, number one, what is our vision? Number two, what is the biggest gap between that vision and reality? My vision is clear. It's that every child born reaches their full potential for joy and productivity. If you have a better vision, tell me about it. I don't think any statesman, any politician out there has a better vision. And so the question then becomes, what's the biggest gap between that vision and current reality? The biggest gap between that vision and current reality can be found by asking the question, what does that child need to reach their full potential for joy and productivity? What they need is three things: safe streets, great schools, and stable homes. There are 10 to 20 million Americans, children, who live a Daily Katrina of unsafe streets, second-rate schools, and unstable homes. And not a single politician is talking about that daily catastrophe. So I am.
Amen.
Yeah.
How, John, did you come to this campaign? That also I find an interesting story, a conversation, if I recollect, with your son over dinner.
Oh, right. That's a funny story. Yes, I decided to run for Senate 18 months ago when my son Alex, then 18, turned to me at dinner and said, "Dad, you should run for Senate against Elizabeth Warren." And I said, "You're out of your mind." And then I thought some more and thought, well, Alex has done some stand-up comedy. He likes pulling his dad's leg. You're kidding, right? And he said, "No, you've got something to say. If you don't say it, who's going to say it? Don't you have a conscience?" And I caved. A month later, I launched the Education First Party. I tried to get other people to run for Senate, but they wouldn't, so I decided to do it myself.
Can you tell that story of the people you approached and what happened?
Oh, well, Danielle Allen, she's a professor at Harvard in the Education and Government departments, and Roland Fryer is a professor of economics at Harvard. They are both black, they're both progressive, well, maybe someday they will run for office, but not yet.
So you reached out to others.
Yes.
They didn't respond at this point in time.
Yes.
You're left with your son's words echoing in your mind. Can you take us further? How was it entering into this arena? You're not by trade a politician.
No, I did run for school committee in Concord in 1997, though, on a civic literacy, civic education platform. And that's really at the core of my campaign now. I think a great test of how our school system is doing is whether or not it's preparing students for the responsibility of voting at age 18. And I devised a test of civic literacy. I call it the Thinking Citizen test. And it's not about memorizing facts. It's about thinking deeply about the most important issues of our time. And I've given it to hundreds of Harvard students over the last 10 years, and not one has come close to passing. I urge you and our viewers to take this test and see how you do. Basically, the idea is that a thinking citizen should be able to make a strong case for both sides in the next election, marshaling three very different things: principles, facts, and solutions for each of the 7 issues so important they should influence your decision. Those issues are foreign policy, economic policy, climate change, healthcare, education, and political process. So, imagine a simple matrix, 3 by 3, 3 columns: principles, facts, solutions, 3 rows, left, right, center. If you can't fill in each of those 9 little squares with a coherent sentence or 2 and statistics as appropriate, you flunk. Not one, again, Harvard student over 10 years has come close to passing. Not one Harvard professor. Well, guess what? When I devised it, I flunked too. Why? Because it's impossible? No. All it means is that civic thinking is like playing tennis or playing the piano. You want to be good any good at piano or tennis, you better start at age 5, practice an hour a day with a rigorous coach. By 14, you're pretty darn good. By 18, you're awesome and you can train younger kids. If you don't have that 10 years of rigorous training, you'll never be any good. You'll never be able to teach your kids because you don't know how to do it. And the best way of teaching is modeling it. So if you're not doing, so why is that? Why is your average Harvard professor of economics or history incapable of filling out that matrix? Why? Because they're like everybody else in America who at the end of a busy day at work or at school goes home. Do they think? No, they turn on the television or the social media and they reinforce their biases by watching some relatively good-looking, articulate person articulate their prejudiced view of the world, whether of the left or the right. And as they watch, they think, boy, he's smart. Boy, I'm smart. I agree. We agree with each other. And every day you become more close-minded, more close-hearted, in short, stupider and stupider. So as you age and you're supposed to be growing in wisdom, age, and grace, you're actually closing your mind. So the curriculum that you can adopt tomorrow so that you can fill in those matrices is simple. When you get home at the end of your busy day, instead of reinforcing your biases by reading Paul Krugman or Thomas Sowell or whoever you happen to agree with now, you go to one of those matrices and find one blank square for one of those issues and ask yourself, what research do I have to do today to fill in that square? You do that every day. You become more open-minded every day. You become more open-hearted. You become smarter and smarter and smarter. If you do that, every time there's an election, every time you have to make a decision, you'll be doing it from a position of much greater understanding than you'll never know everything you'd like to know,
Right.
but every time you do it, it's like playing tennis or playing the piano. You have that rigorous training program in tennis or piano. Every time you play in a concert, you'll be doing better than the last time. And the more hours you spend doing that, the better. The more different players you play with, or the better you'll get. So, as well as doing that on your own, I recommend meeting regularly and thinking citizen clubs with as diverse a group of other citizens interested in becoming better citizens. Now, this you can do in your communities, this you can do in your home around the dinner table, and this any teacher can do in class, starting in kindergarten. In other words, starting in kindergarten, in the social studies component of the curriculum should be kids every day, orally and in writing, making arguments for something or against something based on a principle of fact and a solution. If you do that every day, you become better. It's like hitting backhands and forehands, or playing arpeggios, or with a metronome, not without a metronome. And so that's at the heart of what I'm suggesting we do to improve the quality of our democracy and our schools. But education is misframed. Education is often thought as an issue of schools. Education happens in schools. That's just a third of the story at best. It happens in homes before it does. And the earlier education, the more important it is, right?
Yep.
And so education happens in the home and communities as well as in schools. This curriculum which I've outlined here for social studies, there's other models for STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and also for the arts or athletics. But this one can be implemented in the homes, in schools, and in communities.
So John, once again, you're running for the U.S. Senate against Elizabeth Warren.
And whoever else the Republicans come up with.
And whoever else the other party comes up with. I want to go back to that because you had a word with her a number of years ago in which you spoke as a great supporter. So why you're taking this step now. But before we go there, I also want to ask you, if you can address the first questions, doubts, skepticisms that people raise about a third party, a new party. But before we go there, would you tell the listeners a little bit about your own history, your own background, the journey that has brought you to this decision, so they get a sense of your own skills, abilities, experience?
Sure. I grew up in Washington, D.C. My father was a Romanian immigrant. My mother was an ex-Marine on the GI Bill in Paris who met the Romanian immigrant, and they moved to America. And I grew up in D.C. I went to Harvard. I graduated in 1974. I went to Paris for a year on a fellowship, came back to get a PhD in American history. I was a socialist at the time and was puzzled as to why Americans weren't all socialists. And I decided to get a PhD in American history to find out what I had to do to convert them to socialism.
How we become more social.
But
truly.
my position has evolved since then. I began teaching in 1977. I began teaching international relations, U.S. foreign policy, as well as history and literature. I wrote a manual on how to teach for instructors across the curriculum at Harvard that was published by Harvard in 1981 or 2. I then was an assistant professor of history at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, where I was elected to chair the academic program planning committee to restructure the curriculum at Knox. But then, for personal reasons, I moved to Boston, where I made a transition to finance, worked at the Bank of Boston as a currency trader, and then moved to Fidelity Investments in 1986, where I rose from analyst to fund manager. And there I devised a training program for analysts and fund managers. So my interest in education and curriculum development goes from the liberal arts to finance. I taught at the American Institute of Banking, Asset Liability Management, and then I have my own company, Maple Grove Advisors. It's an SEC registered investment company.
Thank you. John, tell us, if you would, about your conversation with Elizabeth Warren and what happened since the words you shared with her.
Yeah, in 2009, 2010, I was a fellow at the Berkman Center at Harvard Law School. And having worked in finance, I was a big fan of Elizabeth because of her criticism of Wall Street. In fact, I went up to her after class and said, why was she so soft on Wall Street? And I suggested to her that this was '09, I think, that she run for president, and she laughed. And but when she, in fact, ran for the Senate just 3 years later, I did not vote for her. And I did not vote for her because the number one thing I'm looking for in a statesman is for you to unite, to be a uniter, not a divider. And she had adopted a very divisive, simplistic program. So, but she's brilliant, she's charismatic, and I actually, when I taught a course on personal, corporate, and public finance, I used a book she co-wrote with her daughter. So in many ways, she's great, but I think her policies are wrong, her priorities are wrong, and so I'm running against her.
So could one say, John, that in a certain sense you're running against her on her behalf as a reminder of what it is to be a statesperson, man or woman, to be a public servant?
I'm running to highlight what I consider to be the most important issue. And the most important issue in life or in any profession is to get your priorities straight. What is, as you began with, what's the issue?
Yep.
And for me, you get that wrong, you got it wrong. I think the issue is education, and she doesn't. And not only you have to know what the issue is, you have to understand what it means. And education is not something that just happens in schools. It's something that happens in homes and communities. And you should, within the area of education, you have to focus within the issue on the greatest anomaly, the biggest gap between education and education as it should be. And that is what I call the Daily Katrina. The Daily Katrina of unsafe streets, second-rate schools, and unstable homes. No matter how great the school is, you can't imagine a kid in an unsafe neighborhood. That child will think about survival first. It's hard to focus on physics if you're worried about getting killed on the way to the bathroom. You're focusing on not getting killed on the way to the bathroom or back home. So if you care about these kids, you have to have a strategy that addresses the community, the home, and the school. And you have to define your aims precisely. In a sense, education, you have a problem of equity. In other words, 120 years after Plessy v. Ferguson, schools are more separate and unequal than ever, and no one's addressing that anomaly as the biggest anomaly in the country. But the biggest gap between our actual and our potential GNP is the low productivity of the bottom 10%. Yep. That should be our focus. It's not. Why? Partly because, oh, it's too hairy. because it involves the home, the school, and the community.
Yeah.
And no one, as speaking of objections or obstacles, no parents want to be told how to raise their kids. They're my kids, not your kids. Don't tell me how to raise my kids. There's an objection.
Yep.
And the local schools, they're my schools, not your schools. Don't tell me how to run my schools. Or it's my neighborhood, it's my hood, not your hood. Don't tell me how to run my hood.
Yep.
These are big obstacles. And so people don't want to touch the issue because the obstacles are so big. I say the toughest issues are the most important issues. And sweeping the toughest issues under the rug results in what? It results in the disaster we have today. People are afraid to address the tough, hard issues.
So tell us, John, how do you plan to do that, whether you're elected or not? Because there are certain campaigns that you can't lose regardless of the final vote, as long as you give it your best and are focusing on the issue.
Yeah, my goal in campaign is to raise the issue, to get people thinking about the Daily Katrina. No one's thinking about it. No one's talking about it. If minds smarter than mine address this issue, it's more likely that something gets done about it. But if their attention's somewhere else, you're not going to have those brains concentrated on the problem that needs solving.
Yep. Yep. So, John, let's go to the questions, critiques, skepticism that you won in your position introducing a new party that's focusing on the issue, meat. Can you outline the kind of questions you've heard or concerns you've heard addressed regarding your campaign and how you've responded to them?
Sure. One is, why should I vote for you? It's just throwing the vote away, right? You have no chance. And I say, no, I think you're throwing your vote away if you vote for a Democrat or Republican, because neither of them is addressing the most important issue. And by casting your vote for me, you're saying someone cares about education. It's not just this crazy guy. He actually got X number of votes. So by voting for me, you're voting for the idea that education matters, that the Daily Katrina matters, that the system is not working. And I'm voting for people to think about this guy's proposals. The Principles, Facts, and Solutions test as something that can change your life tomorrow, because you can apply that at home. I gave that test, I flunked 10 years ago. 10 years later, I got a passing grade. I graded it myself. I'll show you the results if you want. But I wouldn't give myself an A+, but I'd pass. And I think if you work hard for 10 years, or anyone out there, a child starts at age 5, by 18, they'll be ready to vote if they follow this strict discipline. I have a website called www.thinkingcitizen.com that outlines this test and how to use it as the core of a curriculum, either in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, or adult ed. You can use this curriculum at any age.
www.thinkingcitizen.com.
Yeah.
So, John, let's define education more broadly, because education, as we said yesterday, a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. What is education? Many people don't want an education. They prefer not to be in school. Are you not talking about giving people the possibility to become who they truly are, to gain hope, to gain a sense of meaning, what life is about, what they have to give to unfold? After all, education, as you know well, comes from educare, the word to lead out, that genius in all of us. So again, education is a word that's bandied about. Can you speak to what the heart of it is? And then let's go back to the other objections to your campaign.
Yeah, I could say that there's the problem of equity or justice, which I outlined in the Daily Katrina. Then there's the problem of meaning, which you're addressing now. And meaning is really, really important. What is education? You mentioned educare. Well, actually, there's this word in Greek, maieudex. It was Aristotle's conception of education as midwifery, right, as bringing out the best in you. having been around Harvard for the last 10 years in various capacities, I've seen utter confusion as to what this word means. The words that come up most often are critical thinking, maybe, well-roundedness, responsible citizenship. We want to deliver to you thinking citizens, well-rounded individuals, and
responsible.
And critical thinkers.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. But what do those words mean? What does critical thinking mean? What does well-roundedness mean? They're never defined, which makes you completely unaccountable.
Yep.
What you need is precise definitions, that's the meaning, and then you need the metrics, the accountability, right? So you have the problem of equity, meaning, and accountability. Let me go through meaning and then accountability. So ultimately, education, this is what I call the 7 joys paradigm. It's about taking kids from I can't and I don't like to wow, I can, and wow, this is so cool in the 7 basic joys of life, the several liberal arts joys. The joy of words, the joy of numbers, the joy of science, the joy of music, the joy of art, the joy of sports, the joy of history. The best teachers know how to do that very effectively. What we need to do is identify those best practices and make sure every child benefits from them. A great teacher using a great system can take kids to joy in weeks. Poor teachers using poor methods fail over 20 years. So that's the joy model. As I see it, it's a travesty that every 18-year-old can't pass the principles, facts, and solutions test. The equivalent for the music is that 90% of boys age 18 think they can't sing, they can't do music. Every 18-year-old should have reached the point of mastery. You get to joy through discipline and mastery. There is no reason a good teacher can get you to play a 12-bar blues within weeks. Every high school graduate should have had the joy of composing and performing the equivalent of a 12-bar blues. Every 18-year-old should have had the training in the visual arts and perspective drawing to have drawn a self-portrait in perspectives that every one of member of their family can recognize. It's only by getting to that level of mastery that you can make intelligent life choices. If you haven't experienced the joy of art or music or dance, you can't know if the greatest joy in your life is art, music, or dance.
Right.
So you can't make a smart and informed career choice.
Right.
But relatively focused kids could get to joy in all those 7 by age 10 or age 12, and then they can move on to, I don't know, nuclear physics in high school or something, right? But to give you a sense of that, what that level of mastery, the equivalent of the 12-bar blues performance and capstone performance in STEM, for example, would be, here's the STEM exam that would be the equivalent of the principles, facts, and solution exam in civics. It's called the Parts, Processes, and Principles matrix. Instead of principles, facts, and solution, it's parts, processes, and principles. So the columns are parts, processes, and principles. The rows are subsystem A, subsystem B, subsystem C. The exam is to fill in each of those 9 little squares with A, a coherent sentence, B, a diagram, and C, a mathematical illustration for an air conditioner, a car, a house, your own body. In other words, you should in school have thought through how your body works, how a car works, and be able to explain it to a younger child by the time you're 18. I've given that test to Harvard science majors. Not one has been able to give a clear explanation of how an air conditioner works, or a toilet, or an inclined plane. This is how you should begin science in kindergarten, such that reasonably focused kids can pass that test at age 12.
And what's going on? Why is the situation
Because
as you
the
described?
science students are not taught to think about scientific principles and processes and how they relate to the real world. They're just focusing on getting an A on the next test, on the next multiple choice test, standardized test. It doesn't promote creative analytical thinking about scientific topics. Here's another example of not one single American-born Harvard physics student has been able to answer this question. It's a half moon outside. How long before the next full moon? Think about it, audience. Answer that question. See if you can answer it. Ask your children. Ask your grandparents. It's a half moon outside. How long before the next full moon? Not one brilliant Harvard student in the sciences has answered that. A few foreign-born, every student I asked in mathematics or physics who was trained in Romania got the answer instantly. Not one native-born American. And it's not because they spend more money in Romania per pupil.
Right.
Okay, but in other words, their schools are failing to teach curiosity in the sciences. And that's the key to being a good scientist, is curiosity and observation.
Yep.
Biology students, biology professors at Harvard, right? They're supposed to be inspiring students to love science. I've asked tenured biology professors at Harvard. They don't know the names of the trees that they walk by on their way to their offices.
Yep.
They're not modeling observation,
Right.
curiosity.
Right.
And it's just as bad at the law school. I was, again, at Harvard Law School, a fellow at the Berkman Center. I decided to see if Harvard Law School students, how much they knew about the US Constitution. Not one Harvard student, law student, knew what the preamble was. So I decided, I'll see if my buddies who had tenure, property and intellectual property lawyers knew. Not one knew what the preamble was. And I decided to go, hey, I got to go all the way. I'll meet with the professors of US constitutional law who've taught at Harvard Law School for 20 years. US constitutional, it's not a long document, It's a pretty short document. Not one of the three knew what the preamble was. Only one of them was embarrassed that they didn't know. Got that? Only one was embarrassed they didn't know. They had excuses. What was their excuse? Look, I teach students to write appellate briefs.
Right.
The preamble's never cited in appellate briefs. Why should I know it? You don't have citizenship, understand? To me, as a historian, that's the most important sentence written in American history. It tells us why we have a government. If you don't know what the preamble is, ask yourself why we have a government and see if the preamble gives you the reasons why we have a government.
Right.
Okay, they actually confused it with a certain few sentences in the Declaration of Independence, which no, is not in the Constitution, not in the preamble or anywhere else. But that gives you a sense of how there's something rotten in the state of education.
Yep.
And the problem isn't, as the issue is usually framed, oh, the problem with education, we're not spending enough money. No. There are countries in the world that spend a fraction of what we spend, and their graduates are better at math and physics. It's not an issue of funding. The other people say, oh, it's an issue of choice. No, it's not an issue of choice. It's an issue of best practices. Most charter schools are second rate.
Right.
Okay? The best are great. What the issue is identifying the best practices of the best schools, the best teachers, and make sure every child benefits from those best practices.
So let's come back, John, for a moment. Thank you to the campaign itself and the objections you're hearing, because many would consider you the underdog, even though you've got, like a dog, you've got the issue, you've got your jaw on it. What are the other objections you hear? And I ask this so that the listeners, the viewers, can get a sense of how serious this campaign is. What are the other objections you hear, and how do you address them?
Okay, well, the first one, just to reiterate, is I'm throwing away my vote. And I said, no, you're not. You're throwing away your vote if you vote for Democrat or Republican. And the second is, why are you running for U.S. Senate? Education's a local issue. Why aren't you running for school committee? Well, I already ran for school committee. And no, education isn't just a local issue. It's also a state issue, and it's a national issue. Just a local issue, do you remember Brown v. Board?
Right.
The federal government has had a lot to say and impact on schools nationwide, right? Brown v. Board, Engel versus Vitale, whether it's on the cultural side, school prayer, segregation, the federal government has a colossal role to play as well as the state and the local level. And I say, I'm trying to get ideas out. Take those ideas and implement them at the local level. Let them drive what you do at the local level. Let them drive what you do at the state level. We need coordinated action at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. And yes, education is 2/3 of the local town budget, right?
Right.
This is a big deal locally.
Right.
But changing locally is also very difficult.
Yep.
And if you want to change the whole country and bring equality of opportunity, you don't just focus on your town,
Right.
right? Equality of opportunity is a question that's national in scope.
Yep.
I want every child, no matter where they're born, to have a top quality school that gets that child to being able to play a 12-bar blues by the time they're 18, draw a portrait in perspective, be a great athlete, and a responsible citizen who can fill in that matrix, and a STEM literate person who can fill in the parts, processes, and principle matrix for an air conditioner, a toilet, a car, a body, and a house.
Beautiful. What other objections, John, are you hearing? What other objections?
Well, definitely the biggest ones are I'm throwing my vote away. Education's a local issue. The real issue is just getting more money. And I say, no, we're not doing it right. In other words, what, pay more money for a second-rate education?
Yep.
Are you nuts? Those who think it's an issue of funding just don't understand education and how terrible a job. Top Harvard students can't do what every 14-year-old shouldn't be able to do. And it's because administrators at top schools, and I've sent my children to some of the top schools in the country, and in my judgment, they're not doing a good job because their kids can't pass these tests.
Right.
Yeah. So again, there's the objection. Yeah, throwing away the vote. There's it's a local issue, not a national issue. There's the real issue is funding, or the real issue is choice, or I guess those are the big ones that come to mind. But I'm ready for any objections. Yeah.
How will the campaign be unfolding, John?
Well, the really positive surprise to me was that I made little cards that have my name on it. John Muresianu, U.S. Senate, Education First Party, and then it says socially liberal, fiscally conservative, globally responsible. Education is the civil rights issue of our time. And I would hand it out. And my expectation was that maybe 30% of the people would look at it and say, hey, that's cool, I like it. And 30% would say, what, you're socially liberal, you communist, you? And a third would say, you're fiscally conservative, you poor-hating, woman-hating, monster. And again, before I open my mouth, the actual results of this little experiment, I'd say 90% of people, 90%, put their finger on the card and say, that's me. Mm. To me, that's incredible good news to anyone who cares about democracy, I think, is that the vast majority of Americans are utterly sick of extremists of the left and the right that have hijacked the major parties. They feel utterly disenfranchised. They feel like they don't have a choice, they don't have a voice, and what most of them do is not vote at all. But those who do vote for someone they hate.
Yep.
And they're just so hungry that I'd say 90% of the people I meet, and half of them are from the right, half of them are from the left. It isn't just people on the left or the right. They say, that's me, and they say, you got my vote. So I know one-on-one with the card, I get 90% of people from Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Maine. It doesn't matter. I don't have any, a great website that's attracted people or a Facebook page or, video that's gone viral. But I know people, most people identify with this middle path. And A, the middle path. They're looking for a middle path. B, they believe education is the most important issue. So that, to me, is a big surprise, and it's really positive, and I just urge people to join together. The important thing is not to just say, yeah, you're right, it's to do something about it.
Right.
And you can do something about it in your home, in your school, in your community. If you're a parent, you can push for your high school to adopt a social studies curriculum that makes sense, that prepares students to be able to pass that exam, not some AP US history that asks you who was the vice president under Calvin Coolidge.
Right. So as you move ahead, John, you reference speaking to people from all over the world. Your campaign office is a Minuteman statue in Concord. Where are you meeting these people, and how do you see the campaign unfolding?
Okay. I actually live in Concord on the line of march of the Acton Minutemen. And I take, for health reasons, a 2-hour walk almost every day. And it takes me down the line of march of the Acton Minutemen, through the Minuteman National Park, over the North Bridge, and then down Monument Street, down Main Street, to the train station, back down Sudbury Road to Main, and then back through the Minuteman National Park, over the bridge, and back home down the line of march. So I get to meet people from all over town, all over the state, and all over the country, and all over the world. And so, as you know, I like to greet tourists from abroad with songs in their native tongue. But those from America, I focus on the Education First Party. But I do also tell historical anecdotes about Concord. Being a historian, it's a real treat to live in such a historically important town and to play history professor whenever possible at the North Bridge. So I'll offer, you want historical anecdotes or the political sales pitch? You want to hear about education first or about John Jack?
Can we hear about John Jack?
Sure. I have 3 favorite Concord anecdotes that many people who've lived in Concord for 50 years and pride themselves on their knowledge of Concord history don't know. And one of them is the name of that poem on the Minuteman statue, or who wrote it. The poem, which goes, "By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled, here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world," is called the Concord Hymn. It's called the Concord Hymn because it was meant to be sung. It's only on the statue because it scans to a tune that every one of the 10,000 people gathered for the 100th anniversary knew so well they could sing the poem in unison without a single rehearsal.
Beautiful.
Would you like to hear it sung? Or
Yes,
yeah.
please.
Okay. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled, here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. Okay. That was written by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It has 2 names, the doxology. Doxos in ancient Greek means praise. Praise the Lord, the basic message of every religion that ever existed on the planet Earth since it started spinning a few years back. That's just the Protestant version that everyone in Concord in 1875 knew by heart. But if you'd like to hear the Chinese version, the Japanese version, the Korean version, the Sanskrit version, the Punjabi version, the Arabic version, the Hebrew version, the Swahili version, the Akan version, the Zulu version, I can sing those too. So I offer to tourists from around the world to sing the equivalent from their culture, whether Sikh, Islamic, Jewish, whatever. But it's also called the Old Hundredth after the 100th Psalm. The tune goes back to Geneva, 1547. So that's anecdote number one. I'll skip anecdote number two. Anecdote number three is John Jack, but how are we doing on time?
I think we're okay. We'll be given a warning, John, so
Okay.
carry on.
But I can focus on anything else too.
No, let's hear about John Jack. He's near and dear to you.
Okay.
I think people, particularly voters, want to get a sense of who the candidate is, what touches their heart,
Yeah.
what lies deepest in their hearts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the story of John Jack, as I tell it anyway, is that the most powerful thing ever written in Concord, a town famous for its writers, was not written by one of those famous dudes. It wasn't written by Ralph or his sidekick Henry or that pervert Nathaniel or that hippie Bronson or his charming daughter Louisa May. It was written by someone named Daniel Bliss. And no one's ever heard of Daniel Bliss. Or you ever heard of John Jack? Most people not. Okay, John Jack was a black slave who slaved away so hard he was able to buy his own freedom, but he tragically died soon thereafter. He's buried in the oldest cemetery in Concord, which is the one, it's not Sleepy Hollow, the one everyone comes to see. It's the one right in Monument Square on the hill next to the Catholic Church. If you're standing in Monument Square looking at the hill, you'll see a bunch of tombstones. Those are all white guys. There are a lot of black guys buried on the hill, but you can't count them. Why? They couldn't afford tombstones. But John Jack was very frugal, worked hard, bought his own freedom, also bought his own tombstone, which is on the bottom of the backside of the hill. And it's a rather large tombstone. And on it is written the following, which I believe is not only the most powerful thing ever written in Concord, but the most powerful epitaph on the planet Earth. Having looked on 5 continents, asked people from 5 continents to top this, they haven't. Okay, this is how it goes, you judge for yourself. God wills us free. Man wills us slaves. I will, as God wills. God's will be done. Here lies the body of John Jack, a native of Africa, died March 1773, aged roughly 60 years. Though born in a land of slavery, he was born free. Though he lived in a land of liberty, he lived a slave. Till through his honest, though stolen labors, he acquired the source of slavery, which gave him his freedom. But not long before death, the grand tyrant gave him his final emancipation and set him on a footing with kings. Though a slave to vice, he practiced those virtues without which kings are but slaves. Did Bill Shakespeare ever top that? I don't think so. Did Ralph Henry Nathaniel ever match it? Not even remotely close. So why do we remember the names of second-rate writers like Ralph and Henry Nathaniel when we've forgotten the name of a first-rate writer like Daniel Bliss? That intriguing historical question would make for a prize-winning essay at the elementary school level, the middle school level, the high school level, the college level, the graduate school level. It would make a professional historian famous and rich because the story is so cool it would make for a great Netflix original. But that intriguing question that would make for that prize-winning essay and that Netflix original has a very simple one-word answer. See, Daniel Bliss, the author of that epitaph, was something horrible. Something worse than black, worse than gay and black, worse than anything. He was, in a word, a Tory. You know what a Tory is? A Tory was a colonial loyal to the crown. In the language of AP English or University English, it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative of Concord is a story of brave Americans standing up for freedom against the tyrannical Brits.
Right, right.
But what if the leading Tory in town was an abolitionist? And such, in fact, was the case. Daniel Bliss was the leading Tory in Concord at the time of the Revolution. This is a little moral lesson of understanding the other side. Remember the principle, facts, solutions matrix? Right. Know your side, know the other side. Don't demonize the other side because the other side might be right. If you don't understand them, you don't know. In fact, Daniel Bliss, the leader of the Tory, was an abolitionist. He was the smartest person in town. The quality of his intellect is reflected in the quality of that epitaph. But the story gets so good. And if you're interested, actually, thanks to Google Books, you can get a 20-page essay written in 1906 for the Concord Antiquary and Society telling you the whole story. Because that Daniel Bliss, that forgotten man who wrote the most powerful epitaph on the planet Earth and the most powerful thing ever written in Concord, is also the guy. What happened to him? Banished from Massachusetts under pain of death. Why? For being a little ahead of his time on the race issue? Well, there was something more serious. You see, he may have told a couple of his buddies, who happened to be British officers, about where those arms were hidden in Concord. Which means what? Which means that forgotten man is also the forgotten man who started the American Revolution. He hadn't told his buddies. They wouldn't have told General Gage. If General Gage hadn't been told, he wouldn't have sent out troops. If he hadn't sent out troops, there would have been no shot heard around the world. There'd be no bridge, there'd be no park, there'd be no statue. You probably wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be here either. Anyway, it's a cool story.
So when you say, John, that Daniel was a bit ahead of his time, could this apply to you as well, or do you feel this education issue is coming to a head, coming back to your campaign as we draw this interview to a conclusion?
I think I am, in a sense, ahead of my time. But this is an opportunity for the audience to get in on the ground floor, because I think this is the issue. In other words, just as in the civil rights issue of the 21st century is education, the civil rights issue of the 19th century was slavery. It took a third party to take care of it.
Right.
The Republican Party.
Right.
If you're serious about education, you've got to get serious about education first, because it's the party that can solve the civil rights issue of the 21st century. No other party will.
Thank you. So, John, as we draw this to an end, turn, if you will, to the camera and tell any citizens, voters, how they can reach you, how they can find out about your campaign. As noted, your website isn't as fancy as Elizabeth Warren's, but this is a movement of, by, and for the people. Offer some parting words, if you will.
Yeah. Yes, you can reach me at jmuresianu@yahoo.com. My websites are www.muresianuforsenate.com.
Now, John, because of the name isn't that usual, can you spell it slowly and clearly for the...
Muresianu is spelled M-U-R-E-S-I-A-N-U. So www.muresianuforsenate.com, and the email is jmuresianu@yahoo.com. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck. So
Great.
we conclude this interview, our town, our times, our fellow citizens. We'll be back in a week with Anna Huckabee Tull, who's a fellow Saunterer, a Concordian who has quite a story to tell. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Stuart.